Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming so early. I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng, Chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, also known as CAPAC. I want to thank our first Vice Chair, Mark Takano, our Whip, Ami Bera, Chair Emeritus, Judy Chu, and our freshman representative, Suhas Subramanyam, for joining us today. We stand here united in our commitment to protecting Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders from harmful policies that threaten their rights, their safety, and their well-being. From day one, President Trump and congressional Republicans have made it clear that they are not fighting for our communities. They are doing the complete opposite. Just this week, House Republicans passed a government funding bill that hands President Trump and Elon Musk a blank check to cut Americans' hard-earned Social Security and veteran benefits. Right after passing a budget that slashes funding for public schools, cuts food assistance for kids and seniors, and cuts health care for millions of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. Why? To pay for tax cuts for their billionaire donors. But the attacks do not stop there. Under the current administration, federal agencies are no longer required to provide multilingual support for people with limited English proficiency. That means over 30% of our community, our parents, our grandparents, aunts, and uncles, could lose access to translation services for the programs that they've paid for with their tax dollars. What happens when a senior with limited English proficiency needs help accessing their earned Social Security benefits, or when a non-native English speaker needs help enrolling in Medicare? This administration doesn't care. But it's not surprising coming from the same president who scapegoated Chinese Americans for the spread of COVID-19 and called the virus Kung Flu. Shameful. Nearly 68 million Americans, or 1 in 5 people, speak another language other than English at home. And these people are just as American as those who speak only English. Instead of working to lower costs, as he promised on day one, President Trump and congressional Republicans are waging endless culture wars. This is not what the American people want. The American people want leaders who will help lower the cost of groceries and housing and health care. Today you will hear from my CAPAC colleagues about steps that we're taking in furtherance of this mission and how we're pushing back against policies that put our communities at risk. We will fight tooth and nail to protect our rights, hold our leaders accountable, and ensure that our voices are heard. The challenges facing our community are real and urgent, but so is our resolve. We will not be silenced. We will not be erased. And we will never stop demanding the justice and equality our communities are entitled to under the Constitution. Thank you so much for being here. And now I'd like to introduce CAPAC first Vice Chair and Chair of the Education Task Force, Mark Takano, for his remarks.
Thank you, Chair Meng, and I associate myself with everything you have said. The AANHPI community is not a monolith. While many in our community can trace a heritage, a Confucian heritage, which places a premium value on education, whether or you're from South Asia and you're part of an amazing rubric of communities that have achieved exceedingly well in our public education system, our public higher ed system, our higher ed system in general, our communities are not a monolith. Some of our communities still suffer disproportionate poverty. And the president's, this administration's policies on public education, their hostility to public education, the naming of a Secretary of Education, who is decidedly for a voucherization of public education, the attacks on the NIH, and the question about indirect costs that are frequently negotiated on a year-to-year basis on those NIH grants, are putting universities in a very precarious situation. So whether you're talking about policies that affect K-12 education or higher education, they're decidedly anti-public education and anti-higher education. This has tremendous ramifications for the AANHPI community. I can tell you, and I will say that many of my colleagues here, we all know what it means to grow up in an Asian household with parents who will look at you, and if you bring home an A-, they will say to you, why didn't you do better? Education is a premium value, and I would say that this administration is, I think, undermining one of the key the key values and the key positive aspects of the Asian diaspora in America. That entrepreneurial spirit, that spirit that comes from wanting to excel in school and to use these institutions to get ahead, to pursue the American dream. That is what America represents. And that, I would submit to you, has been part of the miraculous story of the Asian diaspora in America. So I just want to say that the Trump administration insists on promoting school choice over public education. And in reality, it funnels resources away from public education that 90% of our kids in the U.S. rely on, including the Asian American diaspora. Private schools are not subject to the same anti-discrimination laws in their admissions and operations. They're not held to the same obligation to protect students with disabilities the way that public schools are. And while vouchers allegedly give families more choice, the truth is that it removes educational choice from the hands of families and puts it into the hands of private schools. Attacking low-income and disabled children in order to appeal to a base that hates public education for its ideologies is abhorrent and cruel. And of course, our communities have students that need special education. Our students, as I said, many of them are in low-income communities that need Title I support, Title I funding. Before I came to Congress, I was a public school teacher for 24 years. I taught in a Title I school. I taught literacy to students who were behind in their reading. And I can tell you that Title I funding is essential for urban kids and for rural communities that are less diverse. By taking down the Department of Education, this president is undermining an important role that the federal government fulfills. I will tell you that more than 60 Republicans voted against eliminating the Department of Education last Congress. We need to keep the pressure up on those 60 members of Congress and fight tooth and nail to save American public education. And with that, I'll turn this over to CAPAC Whip and my fellow Californian, Congressman Ami Bera.
Thanks, Mark. We live in interesting times right now, and we're watching this administration dismantle a lot of the accomplishments that we've done. And I'm going to talk about this from the perspective of being a doctor and what we see coming at us with regards to the direction Speaker Johnson's given his caucus to cut $880 billion out of the Energy and Commerce bill. We know that there's no way to do that without getting Medicaid. We know that Chairman Smith of the Ways and Means Committee has set a goal of getting that bill across the finish line by Memorial Day. So we're going to mobilize. We're going to mobilize in our community. We're going to mobilize across this country to make sure folks understand if you take Medicaid away from 70 million Americans, it's going to hurt. In our home state of California, we're close to universal coverage. What we learned yesterday in the presentations were that what most Americans care about right now are just those kitchen table issues, costs of health care, cost of eggs, inflation, the everyday things. So we are now analyzing every Republican district. We know how many Medicaid recipients sit in each of those districts. So David Valadez, who won his district by 3 percentage points, has over 400,000 Medicaid patients in his district. We're going to mobilize. We've got hundreds of thousands of doctors around this country who understand that if you take Medicaid away, if you cut it 25%, it is going to mean a lot of folks are not going to get health care. This is going to hurt red states, rural communities, more than it is urban communities, but it is going to hurt across the board. It's going to hurt new American families, immigrant families. We are going to get rural hospitals talking to their members of Congress back home. These rural hospitals are already struggling. We're going to make sure that member knows if he votes to cut Medicaid, that rural hospital may go out of business. In many of these communities, that's the biggest employer. And we have to make sure the voting public understands if they vote to take Medicaid away, if they vote to cut healthcare services to a number of folks, they're going to own it. And that is tactically what we have to do, because we have to flip 3 Republican votes in order to protect Medicaid and in order to protect. So happy to go into further details, but it is a chess game here. It is flipping those 3 votes. It is making sure the American public knows if they take this reconciliation vote, if they cut Medicaid, Republicans own it. Thank you. And let me introduce our Chair Emeritus, Judy Chu.
There is an issue that is emerging already that will hurt our community, and that is the scapegoating of Chinese Americans due to rising anti-China tensions. It started with the China Initiative, a Trump-era Department of Justice program that targeted and arrested Chinese American researchers as spies for China, not based on evidence of wrongdoing, but because of their ethnicity and national origin. This program had disastrous effects, ruining the lives of innocent professors and resulting in the reverse brain drain of our nation's STEM talent. And it was such a failure that only a quarter of those charged under this China Initiative were convicted, with nearly all cases having no connection to national security or espionage, but rather paperwork mistakes. Thankfully, the Biden administration ended this awful program, but we know that Republicans remain dead set on reviving it, and we already see it because it's in Project 2025. And then there was the terrible proliferation of state and federal alien land laws that banned immigrants from China from even buying homes. Bills like this have been introduced in a majority of state legislatures and even passed in states like Florida. These discriminatory land laws harken back to the racist anti-Asian land laws of the 19th and early 20th century and have no place in our democracy. And it prevented a Chinese immigrant, Zhiming Zhou, in Florida from being able to buy his home, even though he put a $30,000 deposit on it. Because of this law, he lost his $30,000 deposit and the home. This is why last Congress, Congressmember Al Green and I introduced legislation to preempt state alien land laws that discriminate against individuals based on their citizenship, and that would stop this racial profiling. And this is why we fight against similar measures that are introduced in Congress. Well, thanks to Project 2025, we know exactly what to expect from this administration. The revival of the China Initiative, more alien land laws, the discontinuation of visas for Chinese students and researchers despite the benefits to our economy and research community. And let me say that the GOP just announced that they will be introducing a bill tomorrow to do just that. But there's even more in Project 2025. The bills that target Asian American immigrants, such as the arrest, incarceration, and mass deportation of undocumented immigrants without warrants, even mixed status families, eliminating family-based immigration and other visa categories that have allowed generations of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to immigrate here. And the Trump administration will not stop there. Though our path forward is perilous with the current administration, as Chair Emerita, I will continue to work together with my fellow CAPAC leaders to combat President Trump's discriminatory agenda and support AANHPI communities throughout the 119th Congress and beyond. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our freshman representative and the representative of where we are right now in Virginia, Suhas Subramanyam.
Thank you, Congressman Chu. Welcome to the 10th Congressional District. I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about the impact DOGE is having both in our community as well as AAPI communities. Right now, what's happening with DOGE is they are firing federal workers all across Virginia and all across the country, or they're putting freezes on critical spending. People know that. What you may not know is many of these businesses and many of these federal workers are actually did nothing wrong and actually do critical work that helps every single American. And so when you hear about an agency getting cut by 50%, just understand that those programs will not continue, and that will hurt every single American. It'll hurt their ability to get a good education. It'll hurt their ability to be safe and healthy. It'll hurt our military and our preparedness. And so many of the businesses that serve our country are owned by AAPI entrepreneurs and people who have expertise. Many of the API community here in Virginia are actually in fields that are in high demand, like IT and cybersecurity, fields that are so critical to our country and keeping us safe. And so, it's not a surprise. Even one of the folks who's running DOGE wanted to normalize Indian hate by his own words. And so we shouldn't be surprised by this, but we should step up and stop it. And this doesn't have to be partisan. It shouldn't be partisan. But here at CAPAC, I know we're committed to making sure that we protect Asian American business owners, especially the ones who serve our country, and in many cases take less money to do really critical work for us and to keep us safe. So with that, I'll open it up to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Any questions?
Good morning, Mark Takano. I want to ask about mobilization, if that's all right first. Get you back to the microphone. When you say you want to get people mobilized, to get people to understand what this will mean for them, so much leading up to the last election was also about that mobilization, trying to get out the vote. What have you been able to learn since then that would provide different results?
So when I talk about mobilizations, particularly around Medicaid, it's getting doctors back in their home districts, getting doctors that in many ways are supporters of these Republican members of Congress, that, hospital administrators, sitting down with them one-on-one saying, look, if you kept Medicaid, here's what it's going to do to our emergency rooms. Here's what it's going to do to our ability to stay open. Here's what it's going to do to our community clinic. So it really is, it's great for us to mobilize in Washington, D.C., but we want this message in their districts, from their constituents, from their supporters.
And they've already said that they're not going to do the town halls that they saw maybe a month ago. Does that change on how you would respond and try to get out that message as well?
I mean, we might be going into their districts doing town halls. It's hard to win elections if you're not talking to your constituents. So I could see a number of, Democrats, if Republicans are not doing in adjacent districts, going in and saying, let's have a town hall with, hospital workers, with doctors, with others. We've got 2 months to do this. We've got 2 months to make the case. A lot of the Republicans understand that this would hurt their districts. This would hurt their constituents. Again, 400,000 Medicaid recipients in David Valladeo's district. We want to make sure that if he takes that vote, he understands he's hurting the people that he works for.
And just one question on China for them is, you obviously made it very clear that you feel some of the policies the administration are pursuing would create backlash in the Asian and Chinese American community. But I'm just curious, do you feel that China poses a national security risk to the United States?
Actually, I want to make it extremely clear that we want to make sure that our nation's secrets are safe. So we know that there must be strong security measures, but we do not believe that there should be scapegoating of Chinese Americans. And what happened with this China initiative is that they looked at their ethnicity first and looked to see whether they could find something on them. And in most of the cases, it was paperwork mistakes. And what I mean by that is you left out this grant that you had or this summer teaching program you had in China. Therefore, we are going to arrest you. And it ruined their lives. So, yes, there was clear scapegoating of Chinese researchers whose names were then dragged across headlines and they were fired from their universities. That's what I mean by scapegoating.
But in terms of the national security risk,
Of course okay, you know what? The China Initiative was the first time that there was an initiative named after a particular country. If there was an initiative that was based on national security, but not naming a country or an ethnicity, it makes a huge difference. But instead, what it did was set the FBI to look particularly at a community, and that's where the scapegoating occurred.
Can I add something to this? I find it peculiar that the president has exempted Elon Musk from any financial disclosures. Everybody knows that he has a tremendous financial interest in China. His Tesla plants, his supply chain. Why isn't the press asking more about this contradiction? If you're really concerned about national security and how our posture with China might be compromised, why not question this very big financial interest and explore that financial interest that Elon Musk has and how his Doge activities may have a negative impact on our national security interest.
I'm assuming you'd subpoena him if you guys have the power.
We already tried.
We already tried.
Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How has the end of affirmative action, along with the Republican Party's broader hostility towards DEI efforts, affected the AANHPI community, particularly in education and workplace diversity? And what is CAPAC doing to push back?
I can say a little bit. Affirmative action, Asian Americans, our community, has sort of been used as a pawn in these lawsuits, a lot of these conversations. We also believe that if you look at the statistics, from this last admissions year, we do not want to be used and put one community against another. It is unfair, it is cruel. And if you look at the statistics from a lot of the schools in the past year, the end of affirmative action didn't necessarily increase the number of Asian Americans enrolled or accepted into these schools. Also, some argue it may be or should be part of a larger conversation. It's not just about affirmative action. If you want to look about equity and admissions, it should be about donor preferences, relationships, and legacy.
I might add that I'm on the Education Committee, Education and Workforce Committee. The administration, in its most recent firings, has completely gutted the Office of Civil Rights, whose job it is to make sure that there is non-discrimination of any kind, including religious discrimination. So anti-Semitism, for example, cannot be fully investigated on a college campus or anywhere else when you gut the Office of Civil Rights. The EEOC has been rendered without a quorum. I have called upon the current executive director and the current acting chair to resign because they have completely dismissed or refused to pursue cases of egregious sexual harassment, egregious discrimination against people who are trans by their employers. This is not good for anybody, regardless of whether your grievance is based on race, whether it's based on religious discrimination, whether it's based on sex discrimination, whether you're being harassed in the workplace. What has happened at the EEOC, based on this very extreme application of this extreme theory that DEI represents a violation of civil rights law, this is Orwellian. It's Orwellian that this is the premise on which diversity, equity, and inclusion is being completely rooted out of the federal mission.